Good afternoon and good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today for a special webinar on marathon and half marathon training. I'm Varun Sriram with Generation UCAN and absolutely thrilled to be co-hosting this today with none other than Coach Greg McMillan. Greg, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Varn. Good to be here with you.
Looking forward to the discussion over the next hour or so. And Greg, we're really going to cover a lot, as folks can see on the screen here. You're going to walk us through the grade eight, which are really your proven important factors for half marathon and full marathon success. So you're going to take us through those eight different aspects of marathon training that we should focus on, and this is really going to cover a whole bunch of different things from different types of workouts to fueling. So really going to get a comprehensive look from you, Greg. And certainly towards the end, as we talk about fueling, we're also going to, in detail, talk about Generation UCAN, what the products are all about, and how they can uniquely help a lot of runners bypass some common issues that they face when it comes to fueling for distance and fueling for marathons. So before we get really into all of that and the meat of our presentation, Greg, maybe you could just take a couple minutes to talk about your background in the sport of running. You've had the good fortune to be involved in a lot of different elements of the sport and bring that unique perspective to your coaching. But tell us a little bit about yourself and your involvement in the sport of running.
Well, I've been really lucky. I started running at a young age and really fell in love with the sport in high school, and was lucky to be a state champion in high school. So really not only loved it, but was successful at it, transitioned from that into running in college and then competing after college, and then was even Masters national champion in the trail marathon when I turned 40. And I've run New York City and Boston, a whole bunch of races. So I'm sort of eat up with it, if you will. I love the sport and what it does for us physically and mentally. And so I come at the sport from one angle, which is as being a runner, still running myself and competitive. I also wanted to study the sport. I fell in love with it so much in high school. So I studied exercise physiology. I got a master's degree in exercise physiology, where my research focused on the factors leading to endurance performance. And so I've sort of was always interested in how can we get better? How can every athlete get a little bit better? And while I was doing that research, that sort of formed the basis of what became the McMillan running calculator that a lot of people have used to know exactly what paces they should use for each workout they do or run, and then predict their race times. And that's on my website, mcmillanrunning.com. You can go there and use it and find out information about yourself. And I also come to the sport, as a coach. I've been very, very fortunate to be mentored by some of the world's greatest coaches, from Arthur Lydiard that you see there on the left to Joe V. Hill there in the middle, and even studying some of the international types of training like the Japanese system from Nabi Hashizumi that you see on the right, and Dr. David Martin, who worked with USA Track and Field for a long time, really around some amazing coaches. Got several certifications in coaching, and so I kind of come at the sport from those three angles when I work with athletes, from being a runner, applying exercise physiology, and learning from these great people. And I've been so fortunate that in my coaching career, I've worked with the full spectrum of runners. I get to work with new athletes who are just coming off the couch or out from behind the computer, getting going in the sport. I've coached charity marathon groups, lots of age group athletes trying to improve, run new PRs, and break time barriers. A ton of athletes that qualify for the Boston Marathon. In fact, we had 252 McMillan athletes in Boston just this year, so helping lots of athletes achieve that goal. And then even athletes that have been national champions and even Olympians, like you see there on the right. So really fun for me to be able to work with the full spectrum of runners. And I think because I work with all types of runners, it really helps me with each runner to figure them out, to figure out what's unique and how I can help that individual athlete optimize their training for their greatest success.
Greg, as you've done this over the years and worked with a host of runners, and been a runner and experienced a lot of these yourself, you've been able to develop what you call the Great Eight, which are your factors for half and full marathon success. So I'm really going to turn it over to you right now, Greg, and let you take us through the Great Eight and identify these different factors and talk through them, and then I'll hop back on with you in a little bit, and we'll talk a little bit more specifically about the fueling aspect of it and how it relates to Generation UCAN nutrition. So with that, Greg, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Thanks. Well, I want to dive in deep here. I want to give you as much information as you can on these factors that we've found just are so important to success at longer distance races. And I think it's consistent across the board that if you're planning to run a half marathon or a full marathon, as we walk through these different factors, if you make a note and you can kind of follow each of these, you really give yourself a great chance of success. So with that said, let's dive in. The first one is consistent mileage. You really increase your chance of success if you're consistent in your mileage across your training plan. What this does, of course, is it builds up this well of physical and mental strength that you can draw on in your race. The race is going to be difficult. It's going to challenge you mentally and physically. And if you have this consistent mileage base, you hear experienced runners always talking about a base. It's this base of mileage that allows you, that you can draw from when you need it. Of course, the question that I always get is, well, how much mileage do I need to run to complete a half marathon or a full marathoner? How much mileage do I need to run to break 4 hours in the marathon? The answer, unfortunately, is it depends. It really depends on your experience in the sport. If you've been running for a while and you've maintained a decent mileage level for a long time, then obviously you can run different levels. If you have an injury history, so you're frequently injured, well, that informs it as well, that maybe we need to lower the mileage so we can stay consistent, not be injured. Another big factor for a lot of people is their schedule is jam-packed. So do you have time to train? How much time availability do you have to even train? Because it's one thing to look at a training schedule and say, that's the one I want to do, but if it doesn't fit into your life, that's going to be a challenge. You also have to look at your life stress level. That really informs how much mileage you should do, because again, it's all one stress pie, and we want to make sure that it can fit into your life. So what I advise people to do is look at training plans and find one that looks like it's very doable. In other words, when you look at it, you think, boy, I've got a high probability that I can get all of this in. It won't stress my time availability. It'll keep me healthy. It'll fit into my life schedule, because inevitably something's going to go wrong just when I don't want it to. And so you've got to have enough wiggle room in the plan so that you're not training at 100%, that you need everything in your work life to go perfect and your family life to go perfect to get the training in. So there's a lot of factors that go into how much mileage you should run. But when you kind of dial in the number of days per week that you can run and the amount of time you have, then really I've broken it into, there's three kind of strategies, if you will, for runners. And the first is, if you're new to half marathon training and full marathon, the idea is you want a smooth increase in your mileage across the plan. And in this example I'm using, this is of a runner who runs 3 days a week, about 5 miles. So 15 total miles is where she'd be starting this training plan. And what you can see is this nice smooth increase where she's just building up mileage, and most of that coming from an addition, the long run's getting longer. She may even add a day of running. And then you'll see every fourth week or third week there's a down week, this decreased week where we let the body catch up. And a down week is really a week where you just reduce your total running by 10 to 40%. And what that does is it kind of allows the body to catch up, so you don't have too much accumulating fatigue, particularly in the musculoskeletal system, because that's what gets injured in runners. is the musculoskeletal system. So when you look at this plan, you can see that she's just building up for 2 or 3 weeks, and then she's got a down week where she can recover, and then building up again, down, building up again, down, building up again, and then dropping down to peak for the race. So across this plan, she's probably going to double her mileage. So for new runners who aren't running that much, that's very doable if they're smart and gradual across their plan like we see here. Now the challenge, of course, is that a lot of people follow the next slide, which is where on the left side, you see again the same starting point of 15 miles per week, and then a couple of weeks are good, and then a really down week, and then jumping back into the plan and boosting the mileage way up, and then dropping down again, and then a big increase, and it's just not as smooth. You can see the difference between the two plans on the left and the right. So there's too large of drops and increases. It's not really a smooth change. For new runners, we'd really like them to train at a level that's very doable, and they're smoothly building their mileage. Now for intermediate runners, the next slide, what we see is, again, we like to take those down weeks every 3rd or 4th week. But you'll also notice that the bulk of the higher mileage is really coming in the last few weeks, the last half of that training schedule. Since an intermediate runner typically is already doing decent mileage, this runner runs 30 to 40 miles per week regularly, then we're going to boost that mileage, and she'll increase her mileage as the marathon gets closer. Again, most of that coming from the longer runs that she'll have to do and longer workouts. She'll get more mileage, maybe even peaking out at 50 miles per week. But again, having those down weeks and then tapering down into the race. That works really well for intermediate runners. No reason to chase too much mileage, but you'll probably find that you get an increase in mileage across the plan. And again, every runner will be slightly different. Now advanced runners, as you see here, they're already doing a lot of mileage typically, and so they don't need a huge increase in mileage to get ready for a half or a full marathon. And again, you'll notice we've really shoved most of the big increase is later in the training plan. So the last few weeks is where the heaviest training is. And I always tell this type of runner, you only want to push the envelope in your volume and intensity, your heaviest training, for only a few weeks. If you try to do that for the entire 16-week plan, that would be too much. It has a high likelihood that you're going to have an injury or you're just going to get burned out. So again, we've got the new runner is probably having a faster and more sort of consistent increase in volume across the plan, whereas the intermediate runner has increases but maybe shoved a little bit closer to the end of the plan, and then the advanced runner, again, kind of later in the plan, but they're not doubling their mileage like the new runner was. They already have decent mileage. So my goal, key number one, is make sure your mileage goals fit your life and build in some wiggle room, because stuff is going to happen. It always does. And you'll get stressed if you start feeling like you're missing your training because life has happened and your schedule was just too compressed. And don't increase too fast. As you saw in those other programs, even for the new runner, we were gradually building the mileage over time. And we were taking those down weeks every 3rd or 4th week. I really like those down weeks. It's been interesting in our coaching program at McMillan Running, the average injury rate in the running population, depending on the survey you look at, is about 60 to 70% of runners are getting injured in their training plans. And we calculated our injury rate at 9%. So we have an 80% reduction in injuries using our training, and I think a big part of that is that we make it fit their life and we take these down weeks so they never have too much accumulating fatigue. So again, our focus is not on the challenge of any one run or one training week. We're really looking at consistency. Think about your mileage across your training plan as a body of work. the average across that. I just want to get consistently lots and lots of good training in without having any interruptions or wild peaks and valleys. And I always tell people, follow a plan. Don't just wing it. You need to have a plan. So find a training plan that fits you and follow it. If you're just winging it, there's too many times when you'll make a subjective or an emotional decision that may not be the best with this sort of long-term view of consistency over time. So key number one, consistent and smart mileage across your training plan. If you can do that, you have a high chance of success. Now our next one is related to the long run, and everybody knows if you're getting ready for a half marathon or a full marathon, you've got to do long runs. And we really recommend two types of long runs. One is kind of the steady long run. This is the long run that most of us do every week, where you're just going out and you're running for a duration, but you're not worried so much about your pace. You're not pushing the pace. It's conversational pace. And then the other one is a fast finish long run. I'll talk about that in a second. And again, on the right, you see I've got an article on our website, McMillanRunning.com, talks more in depth about these long runs, so you can go and check that out, and it'll talk at length about the steady long run and these fast finish long runs. So number two is, let's look at how you respond and recover from these steady long runs. And the long run really took hold, and people started to see big benefits from it. From Arthur Lydiard, who I'm there with on the right-hand side when we toured together on his last tour of the U.S. And he talked about the long runs, these sort of just going out and getting your duration in, developing what he called the tireless state. And if you've been a runner for very long and trained for any races, you know that in the beginning, some of these long runs, you just feel so fatigued from them. But later in the plan, after you do a few, you can just run and run and run. And we see that, right? If you go run with your buddies and you're talking the whole time and suddenly 2 hours has gone by. So you reach this sort of tireless state, physically and mentally, where you really have great endurance. You also improve your energy systems. This helps you reduce how much fuel you're burning as you're running, and that saves that fuel for later, which is what we definitely want in the races. And runners also know, they've experienced, boy, across the plan I start to recover quicker and quicker from these long runs. The first few always takes me 2 or 3 days before my body and mind feel kind of reinvigorated to go back out there and train. But later in the training plan, I feel ready in 1 or 2 days. And again, all that time on your feet builds stronger and stronger legs, and strong legs really help you get ready for the marathon. Now, one question I constantly get when talking about these steady long runs is, well, how long should the longest run be, say, for the marathon? So I'll tell you exactly what we do in our training is that, and we build slowly to this. You can see this in the next slide. We build slowly to this level over 2 to 3 months. For our fast marathoners, for those of you who are running, say, sub 3 hour pace, we like to build that maximum long run to equivalent to the marathon time, or the marathon time plus 30 to 45 minutes. So here's an example which may show you what I mean. So if we have a 3 hour and 45 minute marathon, we're going to build that athlete up to their longest long run should last between 2 hours and 45 minutes and 3 hours and 30 minutes. So marathon time to their marathon time plus 30 to 45 minutes. That's a great zone for the longest run for faster marathoners. Now, if you're more in the plus or minus 4 hour range, then the maximum long run we like is a little bit shorter than your marathon time, so marathon time minus 15 to 30 minutes, all the way up to your marathon time plus 15 to 30 minutes. So simple example, if you're a 4 hour marathoner, then your longest long run might be between 3.5 hours and 4.5 hours. So again, marathon time minus 30 minutes up to marathon time plus 30 minutes. And then if for runners who are more in the plus or minus 5 to 6 hours, we change it again. We think the maximum long run should be less than the duration of their marathon. We typically don't have those marathoners going out for 5 or 6 hour long runs. We like to keep them a little bit more in the 4 to 4.5 hour range. Again, we feel like that gets them long enough to get the stimulus that they will need to know they can push through to the end of their race. But it doesn't beat them up so much, because we're more concerned about you getting to the starting line. If you can get to the starting line, you have a high likelihood of getting to the finish line. If you can't get to the starting line, obviously you can't get to the finish line. And if you get to the starting line injured, it reduces your chance of success on the day. So those longer marathons are going to take a little bit longer. We kind of keep those long runs a little bit shorter. And again, these are by time and not by mileage. Again, that would vary based on the pace, the minutes per mile that the athlete is running. But that's a good zone we found really good success with for your longest long run. So that's another component. If you can get in those longest, if you can recover from those longer long runs better and better across the plan, you've got a great chance of success. Now, the second type of long run, which is number 3 in our list here, is the physical and mental ability in what we call the fast finish long runs. And lots of pro athletes do these long runs and have for years. Now, these are shorter long runs. They're not as long as the ones we just talked about. They typically only build to about 3/4 of your race time. So for example, for our 4-hour marathoner, she might get this fast finish long run. Her fast finish long run would last 3 hours, if that makes sense. Now, how do you do a fast finish long run? You start at your normal sort of easy running pace, and then after a few miles, you dial in your goal pace, and you get several miles in at your goal pace, sort of in the sort of middle of that run. You're trying to be around goal pace. But then in the last 1 to 3 miles from the finish of that run, you run as hard as you can. You empty the tanks. You blow it all out. You push yourself as hard as you can for those last 1 to 3 miles. These runs are really challenging mentally and physically, but they give you a chance to challenge yourself that way, but also to practice your equipment. We tell athletes, wear what you're going to wear in the race. Practice your nutrition plan, what you're going to have the night before, what you're going to have the morning of. What time of day are you going to be running? Practice all of that. And again, on the website, you can go to the Learn section, and there's a whole bunch of videos in there. And there's a video exactly on this, how to do these types of long runs. So you can check that out on my website as well. Now, one of the interesting things about this is that what you'll find over time is that your average pace for these long run, these fast finish long runs will increase. And most of that comes from you're able to get into marathon goal pace a little bit earlier in the run, and you actually the running feels easier at marathon pace, which is a really good scenario. And if you're doing this for the half marathon, you mimic the same thing. It would feel easier at half marathon pace. You also find that you can push yourself faster for the last 1 to 2 miles. And that is a very good sign that you're getting race ready. When you're willing to push yourself, when you're willing to suffer and push when you are suffering, that is a really good sign that you're ready to race. And I know we love every race to feel amazing and like we're running on air and we never even sweat. But the fact is, most of us know that's not the case. You have to be willing to push. If you're willing to push when you're tired, that's a very good sign for success. Now, you can't do this type of run all the time. These are extremely stressful runs. So you only do 2 to 4 of those in the last 8 weeks. And I put a little schematic there on the right of how we often would schedule it. And these are the last 8 weeks of a marathon plan, the long run type each week. And you see long steady run, the first type that we talked about. Week 10, we do the first fast finish long run, so we're 6 weeks out from the race. We get one of those in. 2 weeks later, do it again. 2 weeks later, do it again. You've got 3 right there. And what we typically find is the first one is really challenging because you don't exactly know what to feel. And then the second and third is where you really start to be able to push when you're tired and your pace gets better. And then you kind of rest up for the race. And this is a really challenging run, but I do it even with new runners, because new runners are out there for a long time and maybe they don't have as much experience with racing at shorter distances, and their mind isn't really as comfortable with feeling so much fatigue and suffering. So we want to mimic that a few times, not all the time, but a few times in the marathon and half marathon plan. Typically what we find is that fixes the fade. And if you run a marathon before, you know that there's a big fade that can happen at the end, where the last few miles of the marathon and the half marathon you tend to slow down. These fast finish long runs are very good at fixing that fade. So if that's an issue that you have, is keeping going and having a lot of power at the end of races, then put in those fast finish long runs. When people do that and they really start to nail the fast finish long run, I feel really confident that they're going to have a great race. Now moving to number 4 on the list, this is do some fast running. So one of the things that can happen when athletes are training for a half marathon or a full marathon is that their pace range gets really narrow. They're basically running between their easy run pace and maybe their marathon pace, and they do a lot of training in that zone. And it makes sense, obviously. That's specific for the type of event they're training for. But we find if you put in some fast running, doesn't have to be all the time, but once every 2 to 3 weeks for new runners and intermediate runners, and a little more frequently for more advanced runners, this fast running, and it can be things as like strides, or what we would call a leg speed workout, where you're just picking up the pace for 15 to 20 seconds and then slowing down for a minute or so and repeating that, or a run where you might change pace of 1 minute fast, 1 minute slow, and alternate that 10 to 15 times, or even more traditional track work that runners do. This helps maintain athlete stride length, because one of the things that can happen if your pace range gets real narrow and you're never really stretching out your stride, your body says, great, I will just operate in this zone. And we see a lot of people, their stride gets shorter and shorter, and particularly as they age, and suddenly they can't even go fast anymore because they don't have that ability to increase their stride. So this fast running, we find, really helps them increase their stride. It also builds their aerobic capacity, or people may have heard of VO2 max, builds that aerobic capacity. It also builds their running economy. So one of the things you want to do as a half and full marathoner is you want to be very economical. You want to burn very little fuel as you're running. And this faster running actually helps improve that running economy that can help you in your long distance race pace as well. And it's also kind of fun to get out there and do something faster, and these are usually shorter and repetition type workouts. And so instead of sort of the long steady stuff and continuous running people have been doing, these fast workouts are a lot of fun. Now one of the ones that I like, you'll see it on the next slide, is the Yasso 800s. And Bart Yasso, who is at Runner's World, kind of made this workout famous. And I've really included it in most of the marathon plans just because I think it's a great workout. I think it's a challenging workout for athletes mentally and physically. It definitely breaks up the sort of long training monotony. And it's also a predictor workout. And if you haven't heard of Yasso 800s, here's the way it goes. You build up to doing 10 times 800 meters, or half mile, in the minutes and seconds of your intended hours and minutes of your goal race with equal recovery. And this is for the marathon. So the example is, if you wanted to run 3 hours and 45 minutes for your marathon, then you would build up, starting at maybe 6 repeats 1 week, and then maybe 3 weeks later you do 8 repeats, and then maybe 4 or 6 weeks out from your race, you'd be able to do 10 in 3 minutes and 45 seconds, and you take equal recovery. So you take 3 minutes and 45 seconds recovery jog. Again, you got to build up to this. Only advanced runners may start at sort of 8 to 10 of those repetitions. Most of us would start more with 4 to 6 times 800 and then 6 to 8 and build up that way. It's a very strong VO2 max workout, and it's really a mental toughness workout because it's going to be difficult. It's a big volume of fast running. But it's pretty predictive. So if you can go out and you can accomplish the 10 times 800 in your the time that fits what you want to run, then we find that's pretty predictive. And we kind of even dial it in a little bit more. If you're an endurance monster, and we call that type of runner the one that's so much better at the longer races and not very good at the shorter races, really loves long continuous workouts, more mileage, but really doesn't like the short races and repetition workouts. For that person, it's pretty much dead on that whatever you can average for those 10 repetitions is what you'll be able to run in the marathon. Again, using that 3 hours 45 minutes versus 3 minutes 45 seconds idea. If you're a combo runner, which is most of us, where we're sort of equally good at everything, then it's about 2 to 4 minutes fast. So if you were able to do those in 3 minutes and 45 seconds for your 10 and you're a combo runner, it's probably going to predict about 3 minutes 47 to 3:49 for the marathon. And then some of us, we're speedsters, so we're not really designed for the longer races. We really prefer the shorter races, shorter workouts. We typically can perform really well in this particular workout because it is a speed workout. We find that you've got to add about 3 to 5 minutes onto that. So again, for our example runner, 3 minutes and 45 seconds, if I could average that for 10 of these repetitions, for me, I'm probably going to be 348 to 350 would be the prediction from that workout. But again, it doesn't really matter. It just kind of gives a little bit of a clue into what you can do. But mostly, I think it's just getting you fast. It's getting you out of that narrow pace range so you can challenge yourself. So that might be a fun workout that you can put into your program. And if you can do that, if you do some fast running, tends to lead to success. Now, number 5, tune-up races. A lot of people like to do tune-up races within their training as they build up toward their big race. And I think it provides a really fun break from training. Training can become monotonous, and so every now and then you need something that just sort of takes you out of the training mode and breaks it up. It can also be a great predictor of race time. That's one of the things the McMillan running calculator does, and you may not be able to see the exact times on the right, but this is an output from a woman that I'm working with who's getting ready for the Chicago Marathon, and she just did a half marathon, which is highlighted there in the gray box, in an hour and 55 minutes and 27 seconds over a kind of hilly course, and that predicts a 4 hour and 2 minute and 58 second marathon. She wants to break 4 hours in Chicago. And so given that the half marathon was on a hilly course and Chicago is obviously not a hilly course, we feel really good here as we sit August 18th that by the time we get to Chicago in October, she's going to be in that sort of sub 4 hour shape. So that's nice that we have that in our back pocket. It builds her confidence. She feels good. I also like to do some tune-up races because, the marathon, you just can't control everything. And if you just put all your eggs in that basket, and then what if you show up and it's really hot or something else happens out of your control, you might feel like, wow, I wasted all of that time. But if you've got these tune-up races, I mean, she can already feel great because that's a personal best for her. So she feels like she got something out of this training plan anyway. So I always like that as well. And if you join our run club, which we'll talk, I think you can get information on the website about it. But we have an online training community called Run Club, and I do regular live coach chats there and do a full video on this idea of tune-up races, how to do them, how to insert them. But I think they're a lot of fun, and you might consider that as you go across your plan. And like I said, the way I use it typically is do a race, we put it in the calculator, and that kind of gives us an idea of how close we're getting to our goal time. So it's another important factor for us. Now, number 6 is a really important one because it's not just physical stuff, it's mental stuff. And emotional control is really important in these longer races. And if you've done any short races, there's always these crazy people that go super fast in the beginning, and you know they're just going to get really tired and you're going to pass them. And in the longer races, even more important that you exhibit emotional control. You control yourself early in the race so you don't go too fast. I think this is a picture of Desiree Linden. This was from the Olympic Marathon Trials in Los Angeles. Obviously, she just ran the Olympic Marathon and was 7th there. She came from behind in the trials here to make the team. I think she just really embodies this idea of emotional control. She knew what her game plan was. She knew how she could run the race. She didn't react to other people and kind of get caught up into what they're doing. It's kind of like us if we're on a pace group and the pace group's starting to go too fast. We have to have that control where we can back off and run our own race. Mentally, you also have a ton of mental toughness. We've talked about that in some of these other factors above where they're developing mental toughness. The more mentally tough you can be, the more willing you can be to suffer and sort of keep pushing even when you suffer. Avoiding those pity parties that are way too common in these longer races gives you a great chance of success. And I always, as I'm working with runners, I'm calculating this LOD. It's the level of determination. And I'm sort of getting a sense of what's this athlete's level of determination. And you get that from all this stuff that's above. Whenever they're challenged with longer runs or races or fast runnings or workouts that are going to be hard, what's their level of determination? Are they willing to keep going even when they're tired? Now, they shouldn't keep going if they're feeling pain, not mental pain, but physical pain. They don't want to injure themselves. But if they need to complete 10 of those Yasso 800s and they don't have a pity party and they're able to push through and get the job done, I feel like that's a high level of determination. That's another important factor for success in these longer races. The next one is pace practice. It's really important that you groove your goal pace. You should not go into these longer races not having a sense that you could essentially put the watch away and dial in pretty close to your goal pace. It's really important because our body gets more economical at the paces we run. So the more pace practice that you do, the more improvement in economy at that race pace, something we definitely want. And we've talked about the pace practice before in the fast finish long runs. Typically, when you do get improved running economy and you get really comfortable running at your goal pace, that makes you faster. It means that you've got more reserve energy for when you do get fatigued from the duration. Of course, you need to do this pace practice on similar terrain and similar conditions if you can as your race. So for example, we had all those athletes running the Boston Marathon this year. Obviously, they weren't doing their pace practice runs on completely flat terrain. We were encouraging them, find terrain where it's rolling downhill. Get ready for Boston so you know the effort levels, how they change on uphills and downhills. Really important. And you start short with these. You don't have to go out and run, 3/4 of your race distance at your goal pace the first time out. Start short. Maybe even do it as repetitions. I'm going to do 3 times 2 miles at my marathon pace and take a short recovery in between, and then build up to where you're doing longer and longer and more continuous. Obviously, you can do this part of the fast finish long run. I like to do that. Remember that middle part of the fast finish long run was at your goal pace, and so that gives you a great chance to get in some goal pace running. Or you can even do specific workouts. We'll do this sometimes where midweek for a marathoner, we might say, go out and run 7 miles at your marathon pace. Or run 10 miles, run 3 miles easy, and then the last 7 at your marathon pace. You can do lots of different things to get in more pace practice. Speaking of races, like we talked about a couple of slides ago, you can also enter races and use those to build up, to practice your pace. So if you're getting ready for a half marathon, you can enter a 10K. And don't race the 10K all out. Do it at your half marathon race pace. You get all this practice of warming up and taking your fluids and all that sort of thing. We see this a lot in the full marathon, where athletes will run a half marathon within their program at their marathon pace. It's a fun way to do an event. Plus, you've got all the course support. You can practice your nutrition. It's just a fun way to kind of, not always be training kind of alone, if you will, or at least not in race conditions. So practice that pace. The more you can get comfortable at race pace, that's another factor for success. And then our last one of the Great 8 is that athletes who are successful at their half and full marathon, they typically have a successful and well-practiced fueling plan. You're going to have to fuel in these longer races to keep your brain happy and fueling the working muscles. We know from neuroscience and exercise physiology that you're going to have to provide a little bit of fuel along the way to keep your brain happy. And if your brain's happy, it'll keep saying, let's go, let's push. When it gets unhappy, that's where pity parties happen and the big slowdown. And we know this, right? If you get hungry, you're grumpy. So you wouldn't want to be grumpy while you're trying to challenge yourself in a race. So keeping the brain happy with fueling is important, and then the working muscles pull some of that fuel themselves. Obviously, this is something that's very individual. You have to experiment in training to find what works for you. And for most athletes, it's really a balance between they need to fuel themselves, but you can't just overfuel or else you get GI distress. And if there's any runners out there listening that have done many races, you probably have experienced the GI distress, where you've tried to fuel as much as you can, but the stomach just cries uncle and says, I can't do that. What we're really going for is to fuel in a way that you can have high energy levels, mental energy levels, and lots of physical power over the last 10K of the marathon or the last 5K of a half marathon. If that's where the magic happens, because most people can run their goal pace through halfway or 3/4 of these races. It's usually in the last portion that they really slow down. They may even bonk and hit the wall. But if we can go into that and have a lot of power, a lot of mental energy, and mental excitement to get through that last portion, you typically will run very well. And one of the things that's great, of course, is that you're passing all those people who are not having a great day, and that just makes you feel so good as you feel like you're really flying down the course, and that gives you even more motivation to keep going. So what we find a lot of times is most people, they fuel early, but then their stomach starts to get a little upset and they stop fueling, and then they fade late in the race. And so what we're trying to do is experiment so that you can get your fuel in, avoid the GI distress, have plenty of energy for late in the race. And that comes with experimentation. And then the last point there is that you gotta have this as a plan. You can't go into the race not knowing, I'm gonna have this to drink at this time along the way. You can't just kind of take it as you feel. You really need to have a plan. Otherwise, you'll get behind in your fueling, and then you'll try to play catch up, and usually you can't. So have a great plan, dial it in, know exactly what you're going to have before and during that race, all the way down to every X number of minutes, I'm going to take in this. Every X number of minutes or miles, I'm going to take in this, and this is my strategy. Write it down, exactly what I'm going to do. So I know that's a lot to cover in a short amount of time, but I wanted to go through this and sort of reiterate and maybe focus you in on these 8 things. If you can nail these in your training, I feel like you've got a great chance at success. So try to be consistent in your mileage. Take those down weeks, but have smooth trend in your mileage. do those long runs. Make sure you build up to that tireless state. Practice those fast finish runs. Really get good at pushing when you're tired. Do some fast running. Those Yasso 800s are fun, but it can be any type of fast running. Include some of that so that you mix up your paces. Tune-up races, I like that for most athletes. I think that's fun to get out there. Again, it's predictive of your race performance. Just put it in the McMillan running calculator and tell you what your times will be for these long races. The emotional part of it, the mental part of it, you get a lot of that with all those other components 1 through 5, but it's really something that you want to know you're going to need a lot of in the race. You're going to need to be tough. You're going to need to be under control in the beginning, tough at the end, be really determined. Practice that pace. Make sure that by the time the race comes, you feel very good that, hey, I can dial this in. I'm not going to pace incorrectly. I'm going to dial this in. I know exactly what pace I should be hitting. I know what it feels like. And then that successful fueling plan. And I know Varin can tell us more about exactly how Generation UCAN can play into that. But the bottom line is get a plan, practice it so that you know exactly what works for you on race day. There should be no surprises, no GI distress, and you should be fully powered across the entire race.
Great stuff, Greg. Well, that was fantastic, and